Folks, this is Fernando doing our video for More Survivalists, and today I'm going to be reviewing this beautiful knife that I have here, which is a 2015 Zero Tolerance 0630, which is an Emerson collaboration with Zero Tolerance. Beautiful blade, just lots of things to talk about here. But before we get started, I just want to go back into explaining a little bit where I'm coming from in terms of knives. I've been collecting knives for over 25 years. I mean, it's not something that I just started doing a few years ago. It's really been quite some time. I've used more knives than I could possibly remember, broke a few, sharpened I don't know how many, and I can say that I have a pretty good idea of what I like or what I don't like in a knife. I'm no snob. I'm not a knife snob in terms of being close-minded regarding one thing or the other. For example, I'm perfectly fine with a bussy like this knife, which is, by all accounts, it's an expensive knife, right? But I think I'm getting what I'm looking for in it, especially in terms of steel. Lots of things could be said about the design, which I think it's not as good as it could possibly be, but it's still pretty sound. It's still very good. I especially like the steel that a bussy uses with their Infi steel. I think it does what it says it's capable of, and I think that alone is quite an achievement. A few things that could be improved for sure, but it's overall a pretty much sound blade design. The handle is not as great as it could be, has its things, but I think it's worth what you're paying for if you know what you're looking for. I'm also perfectly fine with a surplus Victorinox knife like this one, which you guys that have been following my channel for some time know I've carried this knife for some time, and yes, it's not super strong, slightly customized, modified by myself, sharpened a lot, as you can see, because it's a steel that doesn't hold an edge as good as some of the newer, fancier ones. Extremely capable knife within its limitations. It's a slip joint design. It's not locking into place, but with care, with an understanding of what the knife is supposed to be used for and its limitations. Great, useful, nice knife to have in your pocket, and will cut and carve pretty much everything that you need it to do within, of course, its obvious limitations. Then you have, I don't know, a knife that I've liked for many years. This knife is what, 20 years old? I don't know, probably. And a small little pocket knife. This is the Victorinox Executive. You have a bunch of tools that I've always found to be pretty surprising. I don't know why it's not more popular, the Executive. I think it's a pretty nice compromise for something very compact and still pretty useful. The knife that has probably been with me the most in terms of years of continuous pocket use, the Minimum Charge TTI. Fantastic multi-tool. Blade, very good, S30V steel. A little bit harder to sharpen, I would say so, after a few years of using that, but holds an edge for pretty long. So that's the edge holding ability is something that I appreciate, because I don't need to sharpen it that much, especially when comparing it with the somewhat softer steel of the Victorinox, right? You clearly understand that this holds an edge better. Okay, so is it always as important, the steel, how expensive a steel is, how great one is over the other, and how crap one is? Is 440 steel or even 420 steel as bad as some people think it is? I think that there's a lot of folks that talk about knives without really knowing that much about them or having that much experience with them, but they just go by what many times the companies themselves say in terms of mostly marketing, promoting a new product, a new steel that they have. So is it better? I say yes, it is. I think that a good steel like this one, S30V, does hold an edge longer and such. It is a little bit harder to sharpen, and this has its place, because for an infantry knife or for a knife that's going to be used by a soldier, maybe flexibility and not breaking, not snapping, maybe that's more important than edge holding ability. So it's very well suited for the intended purpose. knives that I've learned to really like, cold steel knives. You know, knives that are great, maybe some of the best value knives out there. For the price you're paying, you get a tough, strong knife that, you know, very hard use and a very well executed locking mechanism. These are all knives that you know, basically show what I'm getting at here. The Leatherman Sidekick. What is it? A $30 multi-tool. $30 multi-tool, $150 multi-tool. No, it's not on the same level. This one has much better steel. The blade is actually better, has a little bit nicer executed tools, more comfortable. But this is a fantastic value multi-tool. For what you're paying, you get a ton of usefulness. Okay, liner lock. And actually a pretty thin liner lock. Are liner locks always awfully bad as some people seem to believe they are? Not really. You know, I've used this knife for many years within its limitations, understanding that this is something I'm not going to be going crazy prying with, but still it has surprised me how well it stood up to time. So when you have a little thin liner lock like this, and then you compare it to the liner lock that you have in a knife like this one, the Zero Tolerance 0200, which is a fantastic knife. A fantastic knife that often gets a very bad reputation. At least checking some of the videos out there, some folks that got a bad one, a lemon as sometimes they're called, they just were disappointed with it and called the knife crap. This knife is not crap by any means. It's a fantastic, great knife, but it has the limitations of the liner lock system, which are not as bad as sometimes people seem to believe they are. All right, if you start snapping on the back of the blade and it disengages, probably you have to send it back to Zero Tolerance and they will take care of it, as they always do, which is the idea of a good company. Very nice knife, maybe a little bit expensive. I think these have dropped in price quite a bit. Steel, this is a 154 cm steel, which is very good steel used for hard use. Great knife. So this is basically where I'm coming from as a knife person. 7 minutes into this and I'm not regretting a second, because I want to make sure that you guys understand that what I'm explaining here, my point of view has been strongly influenced by many years of experience with knives. And this is how we get to the Zero Tolerance 0630, which is a knife that I've been pretty excited about, and that doesn't happen often, because having had quite a bit of experience with different knives, most of the stuff that comes out just doesn't impress me. I'm not easily impressed by new knives. I quickly associate them with something that I'm already familiar with, or something that I already own, or something that I know is definitely better. So many of the knives that come out there, and you have to understand that there's an industry, right? The idea is to put products out there for people to buy, and that's perfectly okay. Now, sometimes, and same happens with the gun world, always new guns, new models, and always being promoted, because the idea is you guys buying it, right? The thing is that if I'm not honestly excited about something, it's pretty hard for me to recommend it to you guys or even talk much about it. I find it quite boring, you know, showing something that I'm not excited about. This is not the case, all right? Let's go back to what I got here. This is the box that it came in, Zero Tolerance, a real beast. Yeah, right, that's the marketing part. Proudly overbuilt in the US. Zero Tolerance 0630 Emerson clip point ZT folder. Proudly overbuilt in US, fantastic yet again. Kai USA Limited. And here you have a couple little things. A little manual. How to use the wave shapes opening feature. We'll get to this in a second. The wave feature is basically this, and this is something that Emerson has in most of his knives. I think in most of them, the wave feature, which is this little hook here, it was originally intended, I saw in an Emerson interview, Emerson was explaining that it was originally intended as a blade catcher for fighting. So the idea was if someone was attacking you with a blade, you could hook it there, you could catch it there, which otherwise you wouldn't be capable of, right? If you have, let's say you have this other knife, which is also a very good knife. You have this knife and someone is trying to cut you with a knife, you don't actually have anything here to catch the knife on the other hand. The Crossguard ink knives is something that has been around forever, all right? That's how you have this, and some of the older knives that are specifically intended for fighting will have a certain curvature to it, especially in the back. You know, where you have the fingers, sometimes it has an S-shaped curve. I have both of them. I have knives that have an S-shaped handguard, others that have a U-shaped handguard. Historically, very skilled knife fighters, I'm talking about old school type of guys that actually got into knife fights often, they would prefer to have that U-shaped handguard because that allowed them to pry in a knife fight, you know, or knife, or most of all, a knife duel, fighting like on equal grounds with another guy with a knife. They would catch the blade and with a quick snap, you know, either snap the blade or just pry it out of the attacker's hand with a quick motion, and a lot of skill and quite a bit of luck, I should say so as well. But that's basically the idea. And the story goes that some of the SEAL Team 6, I believe, guys were talking with Emerson about having something like that, so as to, you know, maybe they catch a blade here. You may be thinking, how likely is that to happen? I don't know, but the idea was to have something along those lines. Emerson came up with this, but he soon realized that it catched in the pocket when pulled out, like so, and deployed the knife on its own. Basically, let me show you with a pair of pants how this happens. I will be carrying it like this in the left side pocket. Correct. And as you pull out the knife, catches, you keep pulling, opens, and when you do this fast, right, doing it single-handedly without a pen, this being snaps into place like so. It's a lot easier than it actually seems. It actually caught me by surprise. My first reaction to a 0630 was, holy crap. I just received the knife. I replaced the clip. It originally came with a clip on this on this other side, on the right side, for right-handed use, and it had this little, you know, what is it, like a pillow pack, you know, do not eat thing here, like that. So I removed this, moved it to the other side for my left pocket, pull it out of the pocket, and immediately it just snaps into place. I was actually talking with my wife, and she was like, what the hell, you know, what's that? And I said, no, it's a new feature that it opens when it comes out of the pocket. And she said, like, whoa, that's pretty dangerous. No, it's not. And she was like, always, you know, always something with you. Either something it's shooting, or it cuts, or it explodes. Regarding, you know, lithium-ion batteries for flashlights and such. So she was, you know, she had a little bit of a scare there. It simply works very, very well. I mean, I've known about this for quite some time, since it first, you know, Emerson knives have these for a few years. I wasn't really that excited about it. And the thing is that Emerson does make very well designed knives. I just wasn't that crazy about the construction that Emerson has. I think that even though they're great knives, they could have been done better. Which is why this knife is so great, because it combines the very clever Emerson design in terms of the wave feature, but also in terms of the blade. The blade in this knife is actually very, very good as well. I think it's called, in the Emerson models, it's called the Horseman design. Basically a big belly with a very fine tip, fine but strong as well, which is something that sometimes is missing in the newer knives. I've complained before about how cold steel is not making the blades as tough as they used to. All right, still loving cold steel, but this thing about having the full flat grind, I just don't buy it. I think it's, I honestly think it's stupid. I mean, cold steel is a tough knife company. Why are you giving me a full flat grind when, you know, this isn't a chef knife? You know, if I'm a chef and I want to have, you know, a very fine bevel that is quite fragile as well, to be honest, because I'm basically just cutting meat, mostly chopping fruit on a wooden board. Maybe that makes sense, but for a folder, for a tough use folder, don't give me a full flat ground blade. And you know, the kind of tip that you get, you see how thinner it gets. It is pretty thin. and these things do snap. Actually, I'm not making any of this up. You can actually see in Cold Steel's YouTube channel when they're trying out their, the Code 4, which is a great knife. The Code 4, they're torture testing the Code 4, hitting the spine of the blade and such. And in one of those, the guy, if you look closely, you see that the guy hits the knife on the edge of the table, snaps off the tip of the knife. Why? Well, it's just, it can happen pretty much with any knife that has a very fine tip. That can happen. But if you're doing this, if you're going for a full flat grind, then it's more likely to break all along the blade, not just the tip. Now, on the other hand, they do have, with their Tanto knives, they have more of a saber grind, the traditional saber grind that Cold Steel originally used. They kept it for their Tanto. Basically, I just like that this knife has a very tough, strong blade, even though it has a pretty narrow, very penetrating tip. So you have to understand, here you have a 3.6 inch blade. It's not awfully long. Maybe with a 4-inch blade like this one, you can get away with that recurve, which I really favor. I really like recurve blades, especially in longer blades like the Cold Steel Vaquero, the large model with that 5-inch blade. That recurve is just great. Now, when you have a shorter blade, it's maybe a little bit harder to pull, even though they do very well, and that's why I really like this blade design here. Even though it's somewhat of a shorter blade, still manages to have a nice recurve. But here what you have instead is a long belly. And that long belly really slashes nicely as well, in spite of being a shorter blade. I think it was 3.6 inches. Let me check that. Yeah, pretty much that, 3.5, 3.6 inches. I think it's a very good design for the blade length. For a 3.6 inch blade, man, yeah, it's tough to get better than this. Beautiful also, by the way. And then you have the steel being used, which is a very nice steel. This is S35VN powder steel, very tough, a steel that resists very nicely chipping to the edge, and it's gonna be making it a little bit harder to break that tip. Remember what I always say about blade steel: as long as it's properly heat treated, even the so-called crappy steels will do okay. It's not so much about the steel being used, it is mostly about the blade geometry. If you make a blade that has a very thin profile, a very thin geometry, no matter how great the steel is, you're going to be snapping it. If it has a clever, smarter, tougher geometry, which is actually one of the tricks in Bussy knives. Bussy has a great steel. As I said before, I'm buying the Infi steel. That's what it is. But also, I know that the secret to Bussy knives' toughness is the blade geometry. They make these massive blades, and of course, combined with a good steel, the geometry combined with a good steel gets that done. It's not only about the steel, it's about the steel geometry, and of course the heat treatment that you have, if it's properly executed or not. Which brings me to something that I was struggling with before getting this knife. I was between getting the 0630 or getting the 0560 or 0561, which is a very classic Henderson design. It's a beautiful, maybe the prettiest knife, let's put it that way, maybe the prettiest folder there is, the 0560, 0561. It's a very nicely made knife, also by zero tolerance, and it has certain features that are very appealing. The scales are, the handle is a 3D machined titanium, beautiful knife, beautiful blade. It opens with a flip, and it has that KVT system, which is a lot smoother. It's like a ball bearing system that just snaps like nothing. It has pretty much no friction there. Why didn't I get that knife instead? What basically made me go for the 0630 instead? As beautiful as the 0560 is, or 0561, depending on the coloration that you have on their scale, on the G10 scale, the KVT ball bearing system, which is very swift, very fast, it has pretty much no friction there as it opens, it is a little bit more fragile. It is a little bit less tough than traditional washers, as you have here in the 0630. You see that the 0630 is a hard tactical knife, okay? It's intended for very tough use, okay? That's the idea behind the Emerson knives. Some folks hate on Emerson. I'm not a hater, you know. I understand that the weaknesses of a liner lock are there, sometimes over-exaggerated by all accounts. Yes, it's not as tough as a triad lock, okay? A liner lock will not be as tough. Basically because of a design aspect of it, but it's not as bad as some people make them believe. Some of these knives have been used and abused, and again, I go back to my trusted old Leatherman Charge. This is a liner lock, and it's a small liner lock. It's not massive or anything. Okay, it has no steel insert. It's not fancy material, anything here, and it's pretty thin. Yet I've used this knife for, you know, within its limitations, and maybe even a little bit beyond that. I've pried a little bit with it. I've cut things that you basically cut with a 4-inch knife many times. Okay, understanding that this is not a fixed blade. All right, we all know that a fixed blade is something else in terms of hard use. But I can say that I've used this knife honestly. This locking mechanism, I've used it honestly, and in spite of being pretty thin, it has held on very, very well. I mean, you know, Victorinox uses a liner lock with their Soldier. The Soldier is a very a knife that's not getting as much of a good reputation as it should, but the Soldier, the Victorinox Soldier, is a liner lock as well, and it is intended for tough use. The Victorinox Rescue Tool, another liner lock intended for tough use. So it makes no sense on hating on Emerson for using a liner lock on his CQC blades. It just doesn't. But some folks like complaining, and in all honesty, some guys that I really do respect greatly. There's not many of them, but for example, Cliff Stamp, which knows his knives very, very well. He knows steel, he knows angles, he knows cutting very well. Maybe one of the best guys out there in YouTube regarding true knives study. He had pretty strong things to say regarding the 0560. Some of those were very much correct, spot on. Some of them, maybe not. I wouldn't agree on as much. If the liner lock on the 0560 was disengaging in ways it wasn't supposed to, I would have sent it instead to zero tolerance to have it checked. Because I think same thing with the guys that were complaining about this 0200. If it just disengages when you just snap it like this in the back of your hand, maybe then there's something wrong with the knife. It's not. You have to understand that for liner locks and for frame locks, it has to be very well executed. It doesn't allow for much of a mistake. Going back to the 0630, instead of having a liner lock here, you have a frame lock, all right? Most of you guys know what that is. In case you don't, basically what happens is that with the liner lock, you have the scale separately from the locking mechanism of the knife, right? You have a piece of metal that just drops into place and holds the blade there. Rock solid, very good, well executed by zero tolerance, at least in this case. With a frame lock, what happens is that the frame itself drops into place. There's no liner separate from the locking mechanism. The locking mechanism is the scale itself, just drops into place. One of the things that was happening with the 0560, besides those two, would be the weaknesses that I find in the 0560, 0561. First, the KVT system, which is beautifully smooth, the smoothest opening of any folder, it seems, right? With that ball bearing system, but it is a little bit more fragile than traditional washers. Then what happens is that you have a titanium locking bar making contact with steel. Titanium is softer than steel. What happens is that as time goes by, it's a little bit more likely to collapse when a lot of pressure is applied to it. How much pressure? I mean, guys, there's titanium frame locks that have been used for years in tough, honest use, and it's still going strong. Titanium has the ability of sticking much nicer to steel. So that would be one of the advantages. The disadvantage is that it wears and it's not as resistant as steel. That's why it's a little bit better if you have something like this, which is a steel insert in your titanium frame lock. This is all titanium, great material. But in the contact surface, you have that insert, that steel insert that goes all the way back there. This makes for a very, very strong locking mechanism. All right. Is it a triad lock from cold steel? Maybe not, but you know what? You have to be honest in the way you're going to be using this knife. This knife, if you're going to be using it in a complicated situation, you're going to be gripping this knife strongly. Chances of this slipping out of there are going to be very slim. Maybe if I start whacking the knife like that side, yeah, that's not really how you're going to be using this knife. If you're going to be abusing the knife, at least abuse it while holding it properly, which is a death grip like this. Holding it as if your life literally depends on it. That's going to be yeah, the locking mechanism should not depend on you holding it strongly or not, but it can guarantee you based on pure physics that as you do this, you are keeping it in place much more than if you're not holding it. Okay, and this is in all honesty how you're going to be holding that knife when using it for tough, hard use. I really like the way this is all executed. Very strong overall. Easy to disassemble as well, easy to clean. It's the kind of knife that with care, you know, and by care I mean reasonable, not doing anything stupid with it, but it's going to be holding on for, you're going to be passing this over to your children, no doubt. The price is the thing about zero tolerance. Usually they're a little bit more of an expensive knife. This one goes for $200. I'm gonna be leaving the link guys there below for you to check out. I think it's absolutely worth it. You know, if you want a $50 budget knife that gets you a ton performance, go for a cold steel knife. If you want something a little bit nicer, and especially if you want something that with that wave feature, I think it's a honest tactical advantage, because it just, I have it with, you know, with my pants here, just snaps out of the pocket. You have a faster opening mechanism, which may make a big difference one day. You know, it's one of those things that I think is an improvement over the traditional thumb, you know, folder opening mechanism. This requires you to pull it out of the pocket, then open the knife. That's actually 2 steps. Here, with a little bit of practice, and I do mean just a little bit of practice. You don't have to be a martial artist or anything like that. A little bit of practice, even for me left-handed, I just grab it like that, put my thumb there, and as I pull it, just snaps into place, and this is what I get right out of the pocket. Good amount of reach, very strong penetrating tip, and that's all I need to do. And even with that, I can already use it as I get it out of the pocket without any change of grip. All right, I just hold it like that, and as I pull it out of the pocket, snaps out ready to be used. Okay, and with a good amount of reach. I think it's a winner. Again, I'm not someone that is you know, amazed by everything that comes out, and as you see, I don't do a ton of knife reviews. I do a few of them every now and then. You know, when something really, when I think something is really worth it, I will say so. I will say this knife is a great knife, even for a $200 knife. Yes, it's a, you know, it's a combination of excellent tactical design by Emerson combined with excellent execution by Zero Tolerance. Folks, the ZT0630, great knife, highly recommended for a true honest tactical folder with lots of features. I've been looking into this before getting it, and I can say so with confidence. Folks, that's going to be all for now. Remember to subscribe, take care, see you on our next video.